let's set the stage. It's 1968, and America feels like it's pulling itself apart. Vietnam dominates headlines. Civil rights marches fill the streets. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated just months before this album arrives. Cities burn, trust collapses. But out of the chaos comes a voice that doesn't just soundtrack the era, it defines it. Just 1 year earlier, Aretha Franklin had exploded with I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You, and transformed herself from a respected singer into something larger, a cultural force. Atlantic Records finally understood what Columbia had never fully captured. Don't smooth her edges out. Let her play piano. Let the church roots breathe. Let the gospel, blues, soul, and pain stay right there in the room. What emerges is a record overflowing with heartbreak, confidence, spirituality, vulnerability, and power. This isn't just soul music. This is American music at its absolute peak. This is Lady Soul.
Chain, chain, chain. 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 Chain, chain, chain of food.
Welcome to Album Archives, the vault of music history, where we dive into the top 300 albums of all time as voted on by fans of the Music Rewind podcast. I'm your host, Steve Epley, and today we're opening number 249, Lady Soul by Aretha Franklin. Released on January 22nd, 1968, this 31-minute masterpiece is one of the most defining albums of the soul era, packed with towering performances, emotional honesty, and some of the greatest vocal recordings ever put to tape, featuring classics like Chain of Fools, You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, and Since You've Been Gone. This album captures Aretha Franklin at the exact moment she became untouchable, the queen of it all, Lady Soul. Now, I'll be honest here. Going into this countdown, my relationship with Aretha Franklin was probably the same as many of you out there. I knew the hits: Respect, Think, Natural Woman, and honestly, my childhood image of Aretha will probably always be her and the Blues Brothers, standing in that diner doorway, demanding respect from Matt Guitar Murphy. That scene is burned into my brain forever, but I never really had the reason, or maybe the opportunity, to dive deep into the albums themselves. Now that I have, I get it. Now I truly understand why she's called the Queen of Soul. By the time Lady Soul arrives, Aretha Franklin is operating on an entirely different level from almost everyone around her. After years at Columbia Records making polished jazz pop records that never quite fit, she lands at Atlantic in 1966. Jerry Wexler strips away the restraint and puts her where she belongs, behind the piano, surrounded by musicians who understand feel over perfection. The sessions for Lady Soul happen primarily at Atlantic Studios in New York, with a musical foundation laid by a remarkable supporting cast. King Curtis anchors the horn arrangements. Spooner Oldham brings the signature Southern keyboard feel. Tommy Cogburn and Roger Hawkins hold down the rhythm section. Bobby Womack contributes guitar. And through it all sits Aretha, not just singing, but arranging, playing piano, directing energy, and absolutely owning every room she walks into. The album wastes no time proving it. Chain of Fools opens with that now iconic guitar riff, and Aretha immediately sounds unstoppable. There's fury in her performance, but also confidence. Not heartbreak begging for sympathy, but heartbreak staring somebody dead in the eye. The backing vocals hit like a gospel congregation, answering every line she throws at them. Then you have Money Won't Change You, funky and sharp-edged, before Aretha turns around and absolutely devastates you with People Get Ready. That Curtis Mayfield tune was already powerful, and in Aretha's hands, it becomes spiritual.
So, people get ready. There's a train coming. You don't need
At every needle drop, this album feels almost unfair. Sweet Sweet Baby, Since You've Been Gone explodes with pure release, heartbreak transformed into momentum. Good to Me As I Am to You swings by with swagger and groove, driven by Aretha on piano that often gets overshadowed by the voice itself. But man, that piano matters. It grounds everything. You can hear the church in her playing as much as in her singing.
If you had a dollar and I had a dime, I wonder could I borrow yours as easy?
Nobody phrases words quite like she does. Nobody bends emotion inside a melody the same way. But the emotional center of the album arrives with You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. There are great vocal performances in music history, and then there are moments that feel almost bigger than recording itself. This is one of those moments. Written by Carole King and Jerry Coffin, the song is already beautifully constructed, but Aretha transforms it into something eternal. The tenderness in the verses, the slow build, the release in the chorus. It doesn't feel performed, it feels lived. You don't just hear the song, you believe her.
And if I make you happy, I don't need to do more. 'Cause you make me feel. You make me feel. You make me feel like a natural woman.
The album digs deeper into emotional complexity. Ain't No Way, written by her sister, Carolyn Franklin, is stunning, restrained, pleading, deeply vulnerable. The background vocals from Cissy Houston and the Sweet Inspirations wrap around Aretha like a church choir carrying heartbreak through the room. And finally, we have to mention Groovin', a soulful reinterpretation of the Young Rascals hits that somehow feels completely her own by the time she's done with it.
On a Sunday afternoon, really couldn't get away too soon.
10 tracks, barely half an hour, not a wasted second. Let's put 1968 in context, because Lady Soul does not exist in isolation. This is one of the most volatile and transformational years in modern American history. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy are assassinated within months of each other. The Democratic National Convention erupts in violence in Chicago. Protest movements intensify across the country. And through it all, soul music becomes more than entertainment. It becomes identity, expression, resistance, and community. Aretha Franklin wasn't a protest singer in the traditional sense, but her music carried enormous cultural weight. Respect had already become an anthem. Her performances radiated strength, dignity, independence, and emotional truth at a moment when America desperately needed all four. Commercially, Lady Soul was massive. It hit number 2 on the Billboard charts, topped the R&B charts, and produced multiple hit singles. Critics immediately recognized its brilliance, but its deeper legacy came later, as generations of singers realized the standards she set was almost impossible to reach. Because here's the thing about Aretha Franklin. Technically, she may be the greatest singer popular music has ever produced. Not one of the greatest, possibly the greatest.
Tell me, darling, you had to go. Find somebody, I don't care no more, babe. Although you're happy, you better try to get along. Get along without these money won't change you.
Why does Lady Soul endure nearly 60 years later? First, the voice. That seems obvious, right? But it's more than power. Plenty of singers can hit notes. Aretha can communicate emotion at a level that almost bypassed language entirely. Joy, pain, confidence, exhaustion, longing. You feel all of it instantly. Second, the humanity. The album never feels distant or polished into perfection. You hear breath, grit, piano keys, those tiny imperfections that make the performances feel alive. And third, the influence. You can draw a straight line from Aretha Franklin to generations of artists that followed. Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, Beyonce, Alicia Keys, Jennifer Hudson, Adele. The blueprint is right in front of you.
Baby, baby, sweet baby. There's something that I've just got to say. Baby,
For me personally, this album became one of the biggest revelations of the countdown so far. Sometimes these lists reaffirm albums that you already love. Other times they introduce you to records you somehow missed along the way. Lady Soul was that kind of discovery for me. I came in knowing the legend. I left maybe understanding it. And the thing that makes it even better, she's got more albums still to come on this countdown. And I'm looking forward to every single one. What's the legacy of Lady Soul today? It remains one of the cornerstones of soul music and one of the greatest vocal albums ever recorded. Rolling Stone consistently ranks it among the greatest albums of all time. The Library of Congress added Aretha's work to the National Recording Registry. And decades later, these songs still feel immediate. Not trapped in the late 60s, but alive every time you play. Aretha Franklin didn't just become Queen of Soul because of chart success or awards. She earned it because when she sang, people believed her. And very few artists in history have ever really connected that deeply. If you've only ever known Aretha through the hits, do yourself a favor and listen to Lady Soul front to back. It's short, timeless, and overflowing with feeling. New to it? Prepare to finally understand why Aretha exists in a category almost entirely by herself. For me, this is another classic checked off the list. It really felt like discovering a piece of music history I should have understood a long time ago. That's it for this edition of Album Archives, the Vault of Music History. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend or leave a review wherever you listen. Next up is number 248, Some Girls by the Rolling Stones. Check out musicrewindpodcast.com/album archives to see where we're at and where we're headed. If there's an album that shaped your life that didn't make it to the top 300, you can now dedicate an episode of Album Archives to it. Every album has a story, and this is how you tell yours. Link in the show notes. Early episodes still available on Patreon and Apple subscriptions, as I get to them. For now, I'm Steve Epley, and as I always say, listen to the full album. Until next time.
A podcast from the Sidereal Media Group. Back to you, anchors.